He was just a struggling single dad trying to make it through one more hard day. She was a quiet woman with 3 kids and tired eyes, asking for nothing, caring more than anyone could see. Their lives were never meant to cross, but one simple act of kindness on a quiet afternoon changed everything. This isn't just a story about chance, it's about healing, second chances, and the quiet power of showing up when it matters most. If you believe in stories that warm the heart and restore your faith in humanity, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, because sometimes the smallest gestures lead to the most extraordinary journeys. Now let me tell you what happened. A struggling single dad gave food to a mother with 3 kids. He had no idea she owned half the town. The wind rustled through the brittle branches lining Main Street, carrying with it the scent of chimney smoke and a hint of coming snow. Willow Creek, once a thriving mill town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, now felt like a place slowly folding into itself. The storefronts were aging, paint peeling from forgotten signs. The diner served more memories than meals. And yet, for those who remained, there was a kind of resilience in the bones of the town. Quiet, steady, unshakable. Ethan Miller knew something about resilience. At 38, he lived a life that aged him more than the graying whiskers on his jaw suggested. His wife, Sarah, had died 2 winters ago, and since then, life had been reduced to bare essentials. Raising his 6-year-old son, Owen, keeping their old pickup running, and scraping together hours at the auto shop and the late shift at Miller's General Store. Ironically, owned by no relation. Every dollar was counted twice. Every meal stretched like a hymn. On that particular Tuesday evening, the store was nearly empty. A cold front had rolled in fast and bitter, and most folks were already hunkered down for the night. Ethan stood behind the register, rubbing oil-stained fingers together for warmth. The heater had gone out that morning, again, and he didn't have the nerve to ask old Mr. Denny for another repair extension. The bell above the door jingled. He looked up and saw her. A woman stepped inside, bundled in a wool coat that had seen better years, 3 children in tow. They ranged in age from maybe 3 to 9. The oldest boy clutched a dented box of dry cereal like it was treasure. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, and the toddler, barefoot in this weather, was nestled on her hip. Ethan watched as the woman moved quietly through the aisles. She wasn't browsing. She was calculating. Her eyes flickered from shelf to shelf, picking up cans, checking prices, putting them back. Her movements were precise, controlled. She wasn't from around here. Willow Creek hadn't welcomed a new face in months, maybe longer. When she reached the counter, her arms were full. Canned beans, a box of pasta, a small bottle of apple juice. Essentials, nothing frivolous. She placed everything gently on the counter, then paused. Her cheeks flushed as she reached into her purse, fingers patting pockets, pulling out lint, a baby sock, and a few crumpled dollars. I think I left my wallet," she whispered, barely audible. Ethan glanced at the children. The oldest boy stood straight, trying not to look embarrassed. The little girl's stomach growled loud enough to fill the silence. "Don't worry about it," Ethan said gently, already sliding the items into a paper bag. "You can bring it by later." Her eyes met his, blue-gray, weary, full of something ancient and human. "But I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said, offering a soft smile. "And you don't owe me anything." Her lips parted as if to protest, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Owen peeked out from the back room, clutching his toy fire truck. Maybe it was the way Ethan said it. No pity, no charity, just quiet understanding. She clutched the paper bag like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice catching. "Really?" Ethan nodded. "Stay warm tonight." And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the icy twilight with her children, leaving behind nothing but a trace of warmth in a store that hadn't felt alive in weeks. He didn't even get her name. That night, after putting Owen to bed, Ethan found himself standing at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dark. The town's street lamps flickered in the distance, and somewhere beyond them, she was out there, whoever she was. He wondered where she had come from, why she had no shoes for her youngest, why pride hadn't kept her from entering that store. "Daddy," Owen's voice came from the hallway, soft and sleepy. "Who was that lady?" Ethan dried his hands on a towel in turn. Just someone who needed a little help. Owen was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "She looked sad, like when Mom left." Ethan's breath caught. It had been a long time since Owen brought up Sarah without prompting. "Yeah," he said softly, brushing hair from his son's forehead. "Sometimes people carry sadness we can't see." Owen nestled into the blankets. "Will we see her again?" "I don't know, buddy," Ethan said truthfully. But he hoped so, because something about her stayed with him. The dignity in her silence, the storm behind her eyes, and the fact that, despite the cold, despite the weariness on her face, she hadn't begged. She'd only stood there, doing her best. The next morning, Ethan stepped out onto his creaking front porch with a thermos of coffee and a tired smile. Willow Creek was waking slowly. Dog walkers, postal workers, the echo of distant car engines. He glanced down the street, half expecting to see that woman again. But all he saw was mist rolling in over the hills and the quiet, aching promise of another ordinary day. Only it didn't feel quite so ordinary anymore. Not after her. Not after the way kindness, given without thought, had stirred something in the stillness. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment, small and fleeting, had just changed everything. The sun peeked shyly through a patchwork of clouds as Willow Creek shook off the last of its winter sleep. The local park, though bare-branched and brittle from the cold, was alive in a different way. Children's laughter echoed off the frozen grass, a sound that had become rare in recent years. Ethan had promised Owen a morning at the park before his afternoon shift at the shop. The boy needed it. Truth be told, so did Ethan. While Owen ran toward the half-frozen monkey bars, Ethan sank onto a weathered bench and pulled his coat tighter. He cradled a lukewarm thermos of coffee, staring at nothing, thinking of everything. Then he saw her. At the far end of the playground, beneath the gray sky, the woman from the store stood near the swings. She wore the same coat, but now had boots, still old but dry and intact. Her children played close by, the oldest boy pushing his sister on a swing, the toddler giggling in circles near a leaf pile. She hadn't seen him yet. Ethan hesitated. He could have left it alone, let the memory of their brief encounter dissolve into a kind act done and forgotten. But something inside tugged at him, a thread not yet finished. He stood and walked slowly across the gravel path. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and recognition flared in her eyes, followed quickly by something gentler. She offered a half-smile, both grateful and cautious. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said. "I wasn't sure I would either," Ethan replied. "But I'm glad I did." She glanced toward her children, then back at him. "I wanted to thank you again. I was going to come back to the store, but, well, I didn't know how." "You don't have to explain," Ethan said. "It looked like you were having a tough day." "I was," she admitted. Then after a pause added, "We've had a few." He nodded slowly. "I get that." There was a quiet between them, not awkward, but full. She looked at him carefully now, as though deciding if she could trust him. "I'm Grace," she said finally, extending her hand. "Ethan," he replied, though she already knew. He shook her hand gently. It was cold but steady. "I moved back here a few weeks ago," Grace continued. "I used to live here, a long time ago." Ethan lifted a brow. "Really? I thought I knew most everyone in this town." "You probably did," she said with a sad chuckle. "But I was just a girl then." Grace Caldwell. The name stirred something faint in Ethan's memory. Caldwell. He remembered whispers from years ago, an old family name, once tied to mills, land, and money. But he said nothing. Not yet. Grace shifted her gaze. "We left when I was 16. A lot of things changed. Coming back was not easy." Ethan respected the space in her words. He didn't push. "Well," he said after a beat, "I'm glad you're back. And Owen is too." She looked down at the little boy who had just raced up beside them, his cheeks flushed pink from play. "Hi," he beamed. "You're the cereal lady." Grace laughed for the first time. "That's me." Owen reached out and took her toddler's hand. "Want to play pirates with us?" The two youngest ran off toward the jungle gym, and Grace's older son followed, eyes scanning protectively. "He's a good big brother," Ethan said, watching the boy. "He had to grow up fast. she replied with quiet honesty. They stood side by side, watching their children play like they had known each other far longer than they had. Ethan didn't ask why she'd returned, why she was clearly struggling, or why someone with the last name Caldwell now lived so simply. None of it mattered. Not yet. All that mattered was the way she smiled just then, the way the tension in her shoulders eased, if only a little, the way something fragile and hopeful passed between them, too soft to name but impossible to miss. "Would you and the kids like to come by for supper this weekend?" Ethan asked suddenly, surprising even himself. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and some very mediocre cornbread." Grace blinked. "You cook?" He shrugged. "I survive." She smiled, a genuine one this time. "I'd like that. The kids would too." And just like that, it was set. Not a date, not a promise. Just two people, weathered by life, sharing a little space on a winter's day. And as Ethan walked Owen home, he glanced back once. Grace stood still by the swings, watching her kids, her hand in her coat pocket, her face turned ever so slightly toward the sun. There was more to her story. He could feel it. And he wasn't in any rush to learn it all at once. Sometimes the most beautiful things take time to unfold. The wind howled through the bare sycamores as dusk fell over Willow Creek, casting long shadows that stretched across empty sidewalks and shuttered windows. Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed in her aunt's guest room, her back to the door, her eyes fixed on a faded photograph resting on the nightstand. It was the only picture she'd kept from her childhood, her father, arms folded, standing in front of Caldwell Textile Company, his name etched in brass behind him. He looked proud, stubborn, untouchable. Grace remembered that man, how he carried himself like a king, how the town once bowed beneath the weight of his handshake, and she remembered the moment the pedestal cracked. She had been 16 when the lawsuits came. Mismanagement, unsafe working conditions, whispers of unpaid taxes and shady land deals. The Caldwell name, once golden, became toxic. Businesses folded, people lost homes, jobs disappeared. Her father died 2 years later, his legacy in ruins. Her mother left Willow Creek not long after. Grace stayed away for nearly 2 decades, choosing to build her life in quieter places, until divorce, debt, and the unexpected death of her aunt's caretaker had pulled her back here like a tide. Now she was back in the same house where she'd spent summers as a girl, only this time she was the mother, the provider, the woman with 3 children and no clear plan. A knock came at the door. It creaked open. "Mom?" Her oldest son, Noah, peeked inside. "Ellie's asleep. Caleb, too." "Thank you, sweetheart." Grace smiled faintly. Noah hesitated. "Can I ask something?" She nodded. "Are we going to stay here? Or are we moving again?" The question pierced deeper than she expected. Grace drew a slow breath. "I don't know yet," she said truthfully. "Would you want to?" He shrugged in that way only a child forced to grow up too fast could. "I just like it here better than that apartment we had before. People wave here. Owen's nice. So is his dad." Grace's lips twitched. "He is, isn't he? Do you like him?" She looked at her son, his wide, honest eyes, and gave the answer she hadn't yet admitted out loud. "Yeah, I think I do." Noah grinned and disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps light for once. Grace lay back on the bed, the weight of old memories pressing into her chest. She hadn't told anyone her full name yet, not in town, not even Ethan. She didn't want to be that Grace Caldwell. She wanted to be just Grace, the woman who bought cereal, who read stories to her kids, who laughed too loud when spaghetti boiled over. Because she'd seen what the Caldwell name could do. She'd lived it, and she'd watched it ruin everything. That night, she dreamed of home. Not the old estate with its iron gates and formal dining room, but the creek behind it, where she used to wade in with bare feet and wild hair, the place where she felt most like herself. She woke up before dawn and made coffee in silence, staring through the kitchen window as the first blush of light touched the hills. The town was still asleep, but Grace wasn't. She was remembering who she used to be and quietly deciding who she wanted to become. Later that afternoon, she found herself in the public library, tucked between 2 shelves of gently used biographies. Caleb and Ellie were in the children's corner. Noah was flipping through a dog-eared copy of Hatchet. Grace turned when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Didn't take you for the library type, Ethan said. She smiled. Didn't take you for someone who'd sneak up on people in the nonfiction section. He chuckled. Fair. They sat down on a bench near the picture windows, steam curling from Ethan's coffee cup. Grace tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. I was thinking about what you said the other day, about dinner. I was serious, Ethan replied. You all still up for it? She nodded. Spaghetti and mediocre cornbread, right? Hey, don't knock it till you've had it, he said. Owen's a big fan. Their eyes held for a moment, brief but real. I need to tell you something, Grace said suddenly, the words out before she could take them back. My last name, it's Caldwell. Ethan didn't flinch. He just sipped his coffee and waited. You probably remember the name, the factory, everything that happened. He nodded once. I remember. Grace looked away. I didn't want to be judged by it. That's why I didn't say anything. I get it, Ethan said simply. She turned back to him, surprised. You do? I've had to live with other people's expectations before, and their pity. Neither one feels good. For a long moment, they just sat together, the silence no longer awkward, but understood. Finally, Grace asked, Do you think people can ever really start over? Ethan looked at her. Really looked. I think starting over is the bravest thing anyone can do. The weight in her chest loosened, and for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she felt like she wasn't carrying it all alone. The wind softened that Saturday, and sunlight filtered through pale clouds like a blessing withheld all week. Ethan stood in his tiny kitchen, sleeves rolled up, apron dusted with flour. The scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes filled the house, a fragrance that always made Owen announce he was starving, even when he wasn't. The kitchen wasn't much. The cabinets were mismatched, the linoleum peeled in places, and the oven clicked oddly before it warmed. But Ethan had grown fond of its imperfections. It was a space he could control, unlike so many other pieces of his life. He glanced at the clock. Almost 5. Owen stood at the front window, nose pressed to the glass, scanning the road like a soldier on watch. Think they'll come? He asked for the third time in 20 minutes. Ethan smiled. I think so. Wait, what if they get lost? They won't. What if Caleb doesn't like cornbread? Ethan ruffled his son's hair. Then I'll eat his share. Owen grinned. At 5:13, tires crunched the gravel driveway. A beat-up minivan pulled in, its muffler rattling faintly. Ethan wiped his hands and met them at the porch. Grace stepped out first, wearing a soft green sweater and jeans. Her hair was pinned loosely, strands catching in the breeze. She looked lighter than he remembered, less guarded. Maybe it was the sun. Maybe it was something else. Hope we're not late, she said. You're just in time, Ethan replied, holding the screen door open. The kids tumbled in, wide-eyed. Ellie immediately found the dog-eared picture books on the coffee table. Caleb hovered near his mother, while Noah gave Owen a high five like they'd known each other for years. Inside, the living room had been hastily tidied. A blanket tossed over a torn cushion, toys scooped into a laundry basket and shoved behind the couch. The kitchen table was set with mismatched plates, each place marked with a paper napkin folded into a crooked triangle. It smells amazing in here, Grace said, her voice almost reverent. It's a trick, Ethan said, ladling sauce into a bowl. I distract you with garlic so you don't notice how overcooked the noodles are. Dinner was loud and imperfect and wonderful. Owen told a story about a frog he found behind the school. Ellie declared she wanted to be a pizza when she grew up. Noah asked questions about engine parts that made Ethan light up like Christmas. Caleb stayed quiet, his eyes flicking between his mother and the door, as if bracing for something to go wrong. After dinner, the kids disappeared into the backyard, chasing each other with sticks and laughter. Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Grace, motioning toward the porch. They sat side by side, watching dusk settle over the hills. This was nice, Grace said softly. More than nice. Ethan leaned back, letting the quiet wrap around them. You ever think about how many meals go by where no one says anything real? She looked at him. I mean, he continued, I've eaten in silence more times than I can count. Just me and Owen. And sometimes, that silence starts to echo. Grace nodded. It's different with noise, even if it's chaotic. especially if it's chaotic. They sat in that gentle kind of stillness only people with shared wounds can create, the kind that didn't demand conversation but welcomed it. I almost didn't come tonight, Grace admitted. Why? Because I was afraid it would feel too much like hope. Ethan didn't respond right away. He understood the weight of that fear. I think maybe we've been taught to be afraid of good things, he said finally, like they'll slip away if we look at them too long. Grace turned her mug in her hands. Maybe, or maybe we forget what good things feel like. The screen door creaked as Owen ran back in. Mom! Ethan! Ellie fell, but she's okay. Noah's giving her a flower. Grace smiled as she rose. That's a first aid method I haven't tried. They followed the sound of giggles into the yard, where the kids were chasing fireflies under the early stars. Caleb had finally joined them, sword fighting with a stick, laughing, really laughing. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. It was still too early to name what was growing between Ethan and Grace, but it was there, taking root, watered by simple kindness and the smallest brave acts. As they watched their children dance beneath the twilight, Ethan glanced sideways. Same time next week? Grace didn't answer right away. Then she smiled. Yeah, she said. I'd like that. March crept into Willow Creek with sleet and sour winds, battering shutters and chasing warmth from every corner of town. At Ethan's rental house, the roof leaked again, this time in the kitchen, right above the table where he and Owen did homework every night. He set a pan beneath the steady drip and said nothing. There wasn't much left to say. On Monday morning, a letter arrived. It was folded neatly in a plain envelope, slipped beneath the front door like a secret no one wanted to deliver in person. Ethan opened it over the sink, steam from his coffee curling up around the paper. Notice to vacate. 30 days. He read it twice. The owner, a faceless property group from out of town, was selling the house. Tenants were expected to leave by the 1st of April. Ethan stared at the letter, then at the cracked linoleum under his boots. For a long time he didn't move. They had nowhere to go. He didn't tell Owen that night. He made pancakes instead, the way Sarah used to. Burned edges, too much syrup, just enough distraction to push the truth back a few more hours. But the worry followed him, coiled low in his gut like a winter storm refusing to break. Rent in Willow Creek had crept up, quietly but steadily. With the old factory land being sold off piece by piece, everything felt less like a town and more like someone else's investment. At the shop, Ethan worked late, ignoring the dull ache in his back. Grace stopped by near closing time, her cheeks flushed from the wind. She brought coffee, real coffee, not the instant kind he lived on, in a paper bag with homemade cookies. You okay? She asked, watching him too closely. He hesitated, then shrugged. Tired, mostly. She didn't press. Just stayed with him while he finished closing out the register. Outside, the wind howled like it was looking for someone to blame. 2 nights later, Owen found the letter. Ethan came home from a double shift to find his son sitting cross-legged on the floor, the eviction notice in his hands. Are we moving again? Owen asked quietly. Ethan knelt beside him. We might have to, bud. The people who own the house, they're selling it. Why? We didn't break anything. No, we didn't. Sometimes things happen that aren't fair. Owen didn't cry. That made it worse. Can we stay in Willow Creek? He asked after a long pause. I don't want to leave Grace, or Noah, or the frog behind school. Ethan swallowed the lump rising in his throat. I'll do everything I can. The next evening, Grace noticed the tightness in Ethan's smile when she dropped by after dinner. The kids were playing in the next room, laughter muffled by old walls. She handed him a cup of tea and sat beside him on the couch. What's going on? Ethan sighed, rubbing his palms together. We got an eviction notice. 30 days. She was quiet for a long beat. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Yeah, me too. I didn't realize rent was that high around here. He gave a humorless laugh. It didn't used to be. Not until investors started grabbing up half the town. Grace flinched. So slight, but he saw it. He turned to her, searching her face. You know something, don't you? Her mouth parted, but the words didn't come. Grace, he said gently, you can tell me. She looked away. Some of the landowners, they're connected to my family, to me. Not all of it, but enough. Ethan was quiet, letting the truth sink in. I didn't know this house was part of that, she added quickly. I swear, Ethan, I wouldn't. I know, he said, cutting her off before guilt took hold. I know you wouldn't. Still, something heavy hung between them now. Not mistrust exactly, but something close. Grace reached for his hand. Let me help. He pulled back gently. I can't let you do that. Why? Because I need to stand on my own 2 feet. For Owen. For me. If I take help now, what happens the next time something falls apart? Grace didn't argue. She understood that kind of pride. She lived it too. But when she left that night, her heart ached in places she hadn't felt in years. 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared on the front lawn. Ethan watched the man hammer it in, the red letters stark against the withered grass. Inside the house, Owen packed a toy fire truck into a cardboard box without saying a word. Outside, spring lingered just beyond the horizon, but the air was still cold. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't know where to go next. It started with a headline. Caldwell heiress returns to Willow Creek. The words ran above the fold of the Willow Creek Weekly, a paper that hadn't broken real news in years. Yet by noon it was everywhere. Tacked to bulletin boards, passed between customers at the diner, folded beneath elbows in the barbershop. Grace read it in the grocery line. She had only stopped in for milk and bread, the kind of errand that helped her feel grounded, normal. The moment her eyes landed on the paper beside the register, the breath caught in her throat. They'd used an old photo. She must have been 19, smiling, polished, standing beside her father at a charity event before everything fell apart. Beneath the image, the article speculated on her reasons for returning, citing the family's estate holdings, local property transfers, and renewed interest in civic engagement. The words were tidy, deceptive, measured like chess moves. By the time Grace stepped outside, she could already feel it, eyes on her from across the parking lot. A pause in the air, the slow, familiar chill of judgment resurfacing. That afternoon, people who once nodded to her in the park now looked past her. The woman who normally chatted over library checkouts avoided eye contact. Even her favorite barista offered a strained smile instead of their usual, "How are the kids?" Whispers filled the air, faster than spring pollen. At home, she closed all the blinds and sat on the living room floor, while Caleb built a lopsided tower with blocks beside her. She wasn't afraid exactly. She was tired. Tired of carrying a name that didn't belong to her choices, only to her blood. Ethan heard about the article the next morning. He found the paper folded on the counter at Miller's General Store. Headlines circled in red ink and marked with 2 exclamation points, as if someone had planned to pass it around like gospel. He didn't touch it. Instead, he grabbed a sack of nails and a new wrench and checked out without a word. But all the way back to the shop, his thoughts reeled. He hadn't seen Grace since their conversation about the eviction. He'd been giving her space, unsure what lines to cross. But now he realized that space might have felt like silence. At lunchtime, he stopped by her aunt's house. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Grace, not the girl in the article, but the woman who'd poured his coffee and bandaged Owen's scraped elbow last week. "Hi," he said. Her expression softened with both surprise and something close to relief. "Hey, I came to see if you were okay." She stepped aside. "Come in." The kids were at school or napping, the house quiet. They sat in the kitchen, a pot of tea between them, steam curling like nervous breath. "I didn't ask for this," she said after a long silence. "I know. They make it sound like I'm some land baron, here to reclaim the town. I don't even know how they got that photo." Ethan nodded. "They're not writing for truth. They're writing for noise." Grace looked down. "It's the Caldwell name. No matter what I do, it finds me." "Let them talk," Ethan said, gently but firmly. "The people who matter, they'll see you." She met his eyes. "Do you?" He didn't flinch. "I do." A long silence followed, but this one was warm. Grace reached across the table and touched his hand. Just once. Just enough. "I'm sorry about the house," she said. "I know. I wanted to fix it. Quietly, anonymously. I know that too. Are you angry?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm proud. You could have walked away, but you stayed." Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked them clear. "I don't want to be a ghost of this town's past. I want to build something better. He smiled. Then start with dinner. Again. Tonight. She blinked. Again? Yeah, he said. You bring the truth. I'll bring the cornbread. She laughed quietly, but it filled the room like music. That evening, word spread that Grace Caldwell had been seen walking down Main Street with her head high and her children beside her. Not in a limousine, not in high heels, just a mom and her kids stopping to pet dogs and pick up coffee and smile at the bakery clerk who forgot her name for a second. Some people whispered, some judged, but a few, just a few, started to remember that maybe Grace Caldwell wasn't a scandal or a symbol. Maybe she was simply Grace. The woman who helped fix the library roof, the mother who volunteered for story hour, the neighbor who remembered how you took your coffee, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. April arrived with longer days and the faint green blush of early spring, but for Ethan, the calendar felt like a countdown. The 30-day notice on the refrigerator was now reduced to single digits. The red circle around the move-out date stared at him every morning like a dare he couldn't rise to meet. He spent evenings calling landlords, scanning bulletin boards, checking for rentals that didn't require credit scores he couldn't offer or deposits he didn't have. Each time he hung up, Owen would glance up from his coloring book, pretending not to listen, but hoping, always hoping. They had packed 4 boxes, just 4, half toys, half memories. The rest was still up in the air. One evening, while Ethan replaced a muffler under an old pickup, a familiar voice cut through the metallic clang of the shop. Still chasing that rattle? He slid out from under the truck and wiped his hands. Depends. You mean the one in the tailpipe or the one in my life? Grace smiled from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you could use this. I always can. They sat on a bench beside the garage, the kind of bench you only noticed when your body needed rest more than your mind could admit. The sky was softening to indigo, the scent of motor oil clinging to the wind. I've been thinking, Grace began, careful. Dangerous start, Ethan teased, but his eyes stayed on hers. I mean it. About what you said, that you want to do this on your own, that you have to. He waited. I think you're right, she continued. But doing something on your own doesn't mean doing it alone. He tilted his head. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I heard about a community fund the town used to have, set up before the Caldwell collapse. It was dormant for years, but with some legal nudging, it's active again. Ethan took the paper and read. A list of grants, small, need-based, managed not by corporations but by townspeople. Discretionary, no credit checks, just stories and trust. You did this? He asked. Grace shrugged. I made a few calls, reminded a few people what community used to mean. Ethan folded the paper slowly. You didn't do this for me. No, she said. I did it for this town. But if it helps you too, I won't be sorry. He looked out toward the hills where the sun was falling behind the ridge like a curtain drawing close. You're not what I expected, he said softly. Grace smiled. You're not either. 2 days later, Ethan stood in front of the town committee, wearing his best shirt and holding Owen's hand. The room smelled like dust and floor wax. 3 women and 2 men sat at the long table, old-timers mostly, but not unkind. He told them his story, not with drama, not with pity, just the facts. The house, the kid, the work, the hope. When he finished, one of the women leaned forward and said, We remember your wife. Sarah taught my granddaughter to read. Ethan blinked. Thank you. She was good. She was more than that, the woman said. And so are you. The approval came 3 days later. A small grant, just enough for first and last month's rent on a modest 2-bedroom unit on Willow Street. Not fancy, but clean. Safe. A porch swing that creaked and a backyard with a single cherry tree about to bloom. Owen danced in the living room when they toured it. Can we keep it forever? Ethan smiled. Let's start with a year. He didn't tell Grace right away. He wanted to knock on her door himself, share the news like a gift unwrapped. When he did, she hugged him before he could finish the sentence. I knew you'd land on your feet, she said into his shoulder. I didn't. She pulled back just enough to look at him. That's what makes it even better. That Sunday, they all gathered in the new house. Grace and the kids, Ethan and Owen, even two neighbors who brought over lemonade and folding chairs. They sat in the backyard under the budding cherry tree, sunlight flickering through the branches. Ethan looked around, at the mismatched chairs, at the kids making daisy chains, at Grace laughing with her head thrown back, and felt something settle inside him. Something he hadn't dared feel in years. Home. And this time, it wasn't built out of wood or stone. It was built out of people who stayed. People who reached back when you thought you were falling. People who believed even when you didn't. And maybe that was enough to start over. Maybe that was everything. The town hall had never been particularly impressive. Just an aging brick building on Maple Street with a leaky roof and fluorescent lights that flickered like nervous conversation. But that Thursday evening, it glowed. Grace stood behind the wooden podium, fingers lightly curled around the edges. She wore a navy dress, simple and unadorned, and her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. There was no microphone, no formal introduction. Just her voice, steady but quiet, filling the room. Some of you know me. Some of you remember who I used to be. And some of you, well, you've only read about me in headlines. A few in the crowd chuckled nervously. Others stared, arms crossed, wary. She took a breath. I came back to Willow Creek because I wanted something solid beneath my feet. I didn't come to reclaim anything. I came to rebuild something, starting with trust. Whispers flitted through the folding chairs. The meeting room was packed. Business owners, retirees, young couples, farmers, even teenagers from the high school civics class had shown up, leaning against the back wall, half curious, half skeptical. Grace continued. I've spent the last few months listening to stories, to fears, to quiet frustrations. And I've asked myself a question I think we've all quietly wondered. What happened to our town? The room stilled. We've sold off pieces of ourselves, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of habit. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that Willow Creek isn't a portfolio. It's a home. And homes aren't meant to be owned by absentee investors or managed by people who never walk these streets. A murmur of agreement moved like wind through tall grass. That's why I've decided to transfer control of my family's remaining holdings, nearly 48% of this town's commercial and residential property, into a community trust. One governed not by my name, but by yours. There was silence at first, the kind that holds its breath. Then a man in the third row, a former factory worker with a sun-worn cap and calloused hands, stood up. You serious? Grace nodded. Completely. What's the catch? No catch, only commitment. The trust will be managed by a board elected from the community. No outside interests, no private equity, just neighbors, helping neighbors. More silence, then applause. Soft at first, scattered, then stronger. And suddenly the room felt different, lighter, hopeful. Ethan stood in the back, arms folded, watching her. He had known this was coming. Grace had told him the plan in pieces, over coffee and kitchen tables. But hearing it aloud in front of the town made it real. He saw how she held herself, tall, open, unafraid. Not flawless, but honest. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was offering something better. Partnership. When the meeting ended, people lined up to shake her hand. Some with tears, some with hesitant smiles, some with decades-old resentment thawing just enough to form words again. Grace took them all with quiet grace. No pun intended. Outside, the sky was dusted with stars, and a breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and something older. Earthy, rooted. Ethan met her on the steps. You pulled it off, he said. She smiled. They pulled it off. I just gave them the match. He tilted his head. You lit it. They stood there for a long moment, the porch light casting golden halos around them. You know, Ethan said slowly, this town's been holding its breath for years. Grace looked up. Maybe now it'll exhale. Over the following weeks, change arrived not with trumpets, but with work gloves and paintbrushes. The old library got new shelves. The food bank doubled its hours. A vacant lot became a shared garden. Teenagers painted murals on the brick walls downtown. Vibrant scenes of creek beds and childhood and neighborly hands. Ethan's shop, once a barely getting by garage, was approved for a low-interest loan from the new trust. He hired a second mechanic, a local kid named Benny, who reminded him a little of himself at 19, minus the cynicism. Owen started soccer at the park. Ellie joined story time at the library. Noah began helping with the community newsletter. And Caleb, quiet Caleb, began to laugh more openly, his defenses softening in this place that now felt like theirs. As for Grace, she didn't retreat. She leaned in. She hosted Sunday suppers at her aunt's house with open doors and mismatched chairs. She volunteered at the clinic, organized coat drives, and spent long afternoons walking through town with a notebook full of ideas and a heart full of intent. And through it all, she and Ethan grew, together. Not in declarations, but in the quiet rhythm of two people slowly, deliberately building something that didn't need a label to be real. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Ethan's new place, Owen asleep inside and the stars high above, Grace turned to him. "You think they'll remember this?" she asked. He looked at her, then out at the town. "I hope not," she blinked. "No? I hope they just live it," he said. "That it becomes so normal, no one needs to remember it started with one night and one name." She reached for his hand, and in the silence that followed, Willow Creek breathed in, finally deeply, and began again. The Saturday morning after the trust meeting was one of those rare April days when the air felt like silk, and the whole town seemed to breathe a little easier. The scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with warm cinnamon rolls from the bakery 2 doors down from Ethan's new house. He stood on his front porch, coffee in hand, watching Owen ride his bike in slow loops around the driveway. A faint smile traced his lips. There was still a leak under the kitchen sink. The porch still creaked, but the roof held. The fridge worked, and the air didn't carry the weight of uncertainty anymore. It felt like a life, not the one he'd planned, but maybe the one he needed. "Dad!" Owen skidded to a stop, helmet askew. "I saw Mrs. Garrett at the bakery, and she said your name's in the paper again." Ethan groaned. "That never ends well." "No, it's good. It says your shop's getting expanded." Technically true. The new trust board had fast-tracked funding to build a second service bay behind the garage. It wasn't flashy, but it meant more cars, more jobs, and for Ethan, more purpose. Later that afternoon, Grace dropped by with a clipboard, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and a stubborn glint in her eye. "Come with me," she said. "Where?" "You'll see." She drove them a few blocks over to a weedy lot across from the old church. It was half gravel, half forgotten dreams, the kind of place people walk past without ever seeing. "We're putting in a playground," she said, stepping out and surveying the mess like it was a blank canvas. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Looks like a demolition zone." "Every good beginning does." He chuckled, then looked again. A small team of volunteers was already unloading lumber and digging markers into the soil. "You organized this?" She nodded. "Got the permit last week. The school donated some old equipment. The lumber yard gave us half off, and I may have guilted the mayor into sending a crew on his day off." Ethan folded his arms. "You're dangerous." Grace winked. "I'm resourceful." They spent the next hour hauling mulch and measuring boards. Caleb and Owen joined in, dragging buckets and challenging each other to wheelbarrow races. The sun hung low and golden, casting long shadows and longer smiles. During a water break, Grace sat beside Ethan on the tailgate of a volunteer's truck. "I've been thinking," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "That usually means I get roped into something. This one's different. Maybe." He waited. "I don't want to run," she said finally. "Not from the town. Not from people's opinions. Not from who I used to be." Ethan studied her face. Open, earnest. "I've spent a lot of time trying to outrun the Caldwell name," she said. "But maybe what I really needed was to rewrite it." "You already are." She looked down. "I want to do it with you." He froze, not because he was surprised by the words, but because he wasn't. He'd known somewhere beneath the practical, day-to-day rituals that this was coming. Still, hearing it out loud settled something deep in him. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. Grace smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling just so. "I've never been more." He took her hand, held it, didn't let go. That night, Ethan found an old box in the back of his closet while searching for Owen's missing cleat. It was taped shut, corners worn soft from time. Inside was a letter. Sarah's handwriting. He hadn't opened it before. Couldn't. Not until now. He sat on the edge of the bed, the house quiet except for the creak of wind and the hum of distant crickets. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm not with you anymore. And that thought still breaks me. But I know you. I know you'll try to carry everything on your own. That's who you are. But sweetheart, you don't have to. If someone ever comes along who sees you the way I did, please don't push them away. Let Owen see you happy again. Let yourself be held, loved. You deserve that. Love, Sarah. He sat with the letter in his lap for a long time, not crying, just breathing, like the town, like a man who had stopped running. The next morning, Ethan stood in Grace's driveway with a bouquet of wildflowers and a homemade cinnamon roll wrapped in foil. She opened the door, surprised. What's this? Breakfast, and maybe the beginning of something more. She stepped aside to let him in, her smile quiet and certain. Behind them, the sun crept slowly over Willow Creek, and nothing felt borrowed anymore. The ribbon was red, not the dull kind from office supply boxes, but a bold satin red that shimmered in the late spring sunlight. Grace smiled as she tied it across the entrance of the newly renovated community center, double knotting it with the precision of someone who had tied too many lunchboxes and shoelaces over the years. Around her, neighbors gathered in small clusters, some dressed up for the occasion, others in work boots and flannel shirts, arms crossed against the awkwardness of celebration. Children darted between legs, their laughter adding a rhythm no marching band could match. Ethan stood off to one side, Owen by his hip, both of them squinting into the sunlight. The boy held a pair of scissors far too big for his hands, and Grace had to bite back a grin when he whispered, "These are serious scissors, Dad." "They are," Ethan replied. "Use your power wisely." At exactly 11, the mayor cleared his throat, gave a brief and mostly forgettable speech, and gestured to Grace. She stepped forward. Her voice was calm, her presence steady. "Today isn't about a building," she said. "It's about what happens inside it. Meals shared, stories told, hands held, skills passed down. This center belongs to all of us. So let's build more than walls. Let's build each other." She stepped aside and nodded at Owen. With great ceremony and only a little hesitation, Owen cut the ribbon. Cheers rose up like confetti in the air. Inside, the center smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. A long table had been set with finger foods, lemonade, and dozens of homemade pies. Volunteers wore name tags, handing out flyers about art classes, literacy workshops, veterans' lunches, and summer tutoring programs. Ethan wandered the halls slowly, amazed at how quickly the space had come to life. In one room, teenagers were already setting up donated laptops. In another, Caleb and Ellie were painting paper butterflies with a woman who'd once taught preschool. Grace stood near the back, talking to a couple in their 60s who'd recently returned to town after years away. She caught Ethan's eye and smiled. It was a small thing, that smile, but to him it meant everything. It meant she wasn't just surviving here. She was home. Later that evening, long after the pies had been devoured and the last child had left with paint in their hair, Ethan found Grace sweeping the floor of the multipurpose room. "You don't have to do that," he said, leaning in the doorway. "I know, but I want to finish it myself." He crossed the room and took the broom gently from her hands. "Then let me finish it with you." They cleaned in silence, working side by side until the floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights. When the last chair was stacked and the lights dimmed, they stepped outside into a soft violet dusk. "I've been thinking," Grace said as they walked down the sidewalk toward her car. "That always gets me in trouble," Ethan replied, and she laughed. "I think I want to stay," she said. He looked at her. "You're staying. I mean longer. For good." Ethan stopped. The moment held between them like breath. "I'm glad," he said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "This was left at the welcome table for you." He opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note on town stationery. "Your loan is officially approved. Construction on the second bay begins June 1st. Thanks for believing in this town. Willow Creek Trust Board." Ethan stared at it, heart thudding, not from surprise, but from a strange, humble kind of relief. "They believe in you," Grace said. "I think I'm finally starting to believe in me too." They reached her car. Neither of them made a move to open the door. I used to think redemption looked like confession, Grace murmured, but maybe it looks more like contribution. Showing up. Trying again. Ethan took her hand. Maybe it looks like standing still long enough for roots to take hold. She leaned into him, head against his shoulder. Then let's grow something. He kissed her hair, soft and deliberate. The following week, the center buzzed with life. The shared garden out back bloomed with wildflowers and raised vegetable beds. Teenagers held movie nights. Seniors hosted quilting bees. The sound of a community remembering itself could be heard in every echoing hallway. One evening, Ethan brought in a battered wooden sign, Miller and Son Auto Repair, and placed it gently on the wall near the kitchen, where people waited for job interviews, resume help, or just a kind conversation. Why here? Grace asked. He grinned. Because this is where people get rebuilt too. She kissed him then, fully without hesitation, and someone in the hallway clapped awkwardly. They laughed. Because some new beginnings come quietly, and others arrive, bright and bold, ribbon-wrapped and already unfolding. The attic was warmer than Ethan expected, with dust motes drifting in shafts of late afternoon light like lazy snowflakes. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, the scent of old paper and cedar rising as he pulled open box after box, each one a time capsule of someone else's life, or maybe his own. He was looking for photo albums. Owen's class project asked each student to bring in family pictures, and Ethan had promised they'd find something, anything, that showed Sarah the way she really was. Not just a memory, but a moment. After 30 minutes of searching, his hands landed on a small wooden chest with tarnished brass corners and a brittle leather handle. Inside were letters, dozens of them, most from Sarah's college years, postcards, scribbled notes, envelopes worn soft by time and rereading, and then tucked at the very bottom, a white envelope sealed and marked in her handwriting, to Ethan, for later. His heart thudded. He sat cross-legged on the floor and turned the envelope over in his hands, unsure if the air had gotten thinner or if it was just the pressure in his chest. It had been 3 years. He hadn't expected more words from her, certainly not now. With slow fingers, he opened it. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you're still here. I hope you've had more good days than hard ones, though I know that's not your way. You carry the world too quietly. But if nothing else, I hope this letter finds you living, not just surviving. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if you're alone, or if someone kind has found you and reminded you how to laugh again. If so, let them. You don't have to hold on to me to honor me. Love doesn't shrink when we give it to someone new. It grows. Ethan, you were the best chapter of my life, but it was never meant to be the whole book. Let the pages keep turning. Love always, Sarah. He didn't cry, not in the loud, broken way he had that first year. He just sat there holding the paper like it might disappear if he blinked too long. Then footsteps on the stairs. Owen's voice calling, "Dad, did you find any?" Ethan cleared his throat and slipped the letter into his back pocket. "Yeah," he said, "I found something." That evening, he and Owen sat cross-legged on the living room rug, flipping through old albums. There were pictures of Sarah holding Owen as a baby, grinning in oversized sunglasses, covered in flour during one of her baking experiments. Owen laughed until he hiccuped. "She was kinda cool," he said. "She was more than that," Ethan replied, smiling. Grace arrived just before sunset, carrying takeout from the new taco place on Main. She stepped inside, took one look at the scattered photos, and sat beside them without a word. She didn't pry. She didn't flinch. She just offered her presence like a gentle hand on the shoulder. After dinner, the kids sprawled on the couch watching a cartoon, and Ethan walked Grace to the porch. "There's something I want you to read," he said, handing her the folded letter. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. Grace read it slowly, then looked up with glassy eyes. She was incredible. "She was," Ethan said, "and she's the reason I know what real love looks like." Grace exhaled. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. Not explanations, not comparisons, not permission." "I know," he said, "but I want you to know what's in my heart. I didn't fall in love again by accident. I chose it. I choose you." Grace blinked, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, tight and full and quiet. Ethan stood for a long time at that window, the cool night brushing over his skin like a reminder that some wounds don't vanish. They just breathe easier in open air. Behind him, the house murmured with the quiet sounds of safety, the soft clicks of a cooling stove, the hum of the old fridge, the gentle rustle of a blanket shifting as Owen turned in his sleep. This home wasn't grand. It had been patched, repainted, and rebuilt not just with tools, but with intention. Grace's touches were everywhere now. A vase of wildflowers in the kitchen, books stacked beside the couch. The laugh lines at Ethan's eyes had deepened, but they weren't just from sorrow anymore. He looked out over Willow Creek, cloaked in dusk, and thought of how far they'd come. He remembered the first night he'd handed Grace that bag of groceries, not knowing her name, not knowing she'd carry the power to shape everything that came after. Back then, he was surviving. Now he was choosing. The next morning brought sunlight that spilled through the curtains like honey. Ethan stirred early, compelled by something he couldn't quite name. Downstairs, the house was still. Grace and the kids were staying over that weekend, a new tradition that no longer required discussion or permission. He stepped into the kitchen and began to make coffee, the familiar rhythm anchoring him. As it brewed, he walked over to the fridge and pulled out a photograph he'd tucked there the night before. It was Sarah holding baby Owen, caught mid-laugh in their old backyard. Windblown hair, joy uninhibited, the kind of photo that made memory feel like presence. He pinned it to the wall above the coffee pot, not as a shrine, but as a thread in the tapestry of a life that had been torn, stitched, and made more beautiful for it. Later that afternoon, they all piled into Grace's SUV and drove out to the creek. The place hadn't changed much. The same slow current winding between mossy rocks. The same rust-colored dock where Grace had once fished with her grandfather. The kids leapt from the car with sandals in hand, racing down the trail in a blur of laughter and squabbling over peanut butter sandwiches. Ethan and Grace followed behind at a slower pace. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. He took her hand. "No, but I'm glad we did." They settled on a quilt near the bank and watched as Owen and Caleb built a dam with sticks, and Ellie sang to a frog she insisted was named Harold. "I like the quiet here," Grace murmured. Ethan smiled. "You've earned it." She glanced over. "You know, there's still a lot of rebuilding ahead, not just for the town." "I know," he said, "but I'm not scared of that anymore." He reached for the thermos and poured them both coffee. They sipped in silence. It wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of peace. And that peace, at long last, was earned. Summer crept into Willow Creek the way dawn touches a bedroom curtain. Quiet, golden, and impossibly gentle. The days stretched longer, the air thick with honeysuckle and lawn clippings. Windows stayed open past dark. Children played barefoot until the stars blinked into place. At the corner of Willow and Maple, Ethan's auto shop now bore a new hand-painted sign above the door. Miller and Son Auto Repair, Esther 2013, rebuilt 2025. The second service bay gleamed under a fresh coat of paint, and a bench out front, donated by the community center, invited neighbors to sit a while. Inside, Owen helped organize the tool wall, while Benny, the new apprentice, adjusted a timing belt under the hood of a minivan. Ethan stood near the front, sipping lemonade someone had dropped off that morning, thinking of nothing in particular, and everything at once. Grace walked in with Ellie on her hip and a bag of sandwiches in hand. "Lunch delivery," she announced. "Turkey or peanut butter, but I wouldn't mix them up." Ethan grinned. "You're a miracle." She set the bag down and kissed him lightly, the kind of kiss that had stopped needing permission months ago. It was just part of the rhythm now, like coffee in the morning or laughter in the kitchen. Owen emerged from the back, grease on his forehead and pride in his grin. "I organized the wrenches by size." "Perfect," Ethan said. "Now do that with your sock drawer." At sure everyone laughed. That evening, the town gathered at the green behind the library for the first Willow Creek Summer Night Festival. It wasn't fancy, just folding chairs, music, and too many casserole dishes, but it felt like a celebration of something bigger than fireworks or parades. Grace helped set up the storytelling booth, where kids could share their favorite memories or dreams into an old tape recorder. Caleb took his job as sound technician very seriously. Ellie wore a flower crown and offered people dandelions like gold coins. Owen chased Bubbles until he collapsed in a pile of grass and giggles. Ethan joined Grace near the stage as dusk deepened and string lights flickered to life. "You remember the day we met?" she asked, watching the children spin beneath the trees. He nodded. "You were counting cans. And you were pretending to know how the register worked." They laughed. "I thought it was just going to be a moment," she said. "Just a little kindness and then goodbye." But it turned out to be the whole beginning. A breeze passed between them, warm and soft. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think stories really change anything?" she asked. Ethan looked out across the green. There, people who hadn't spoken in years now danced barefoot on the grass. Former skeptics stirred lemonade beside kids whose voices once trembled from fear. A once-forgotten town now glowed from within. "Yeah," he said, "I think stories change everything." As the stars came out, Grace took the stage with a single note card and a smile that steadied even the rowdiest toddlers. "I don't want to give a speech," she began. "Just a thank you." The crowd hushed. "Thank you for letting me come back, not just into town, but into your lives. Thank you for seeing more than my last name. Thank you for showing up over and over again." She paused, eyes scanning the faces lit by lanterns and memory. "We may not all come from the same history, but we can choose the story we write together." Applause rippled like wind through wheat. Grace stepped down, and Ethan met her with open arms. The next morning, the town square still held echoes of music and footsteps. Folding chairs sat in uneven rows, half stacked. Crayon drawings from the storytelling booth fluttered in the breeze. Stick figures and sunbursts, one labeled "My New Friends" in wobbly handwriting. Ethan stopped by the square on his way to the shop, coffee in hand, and paused in front of the mural wall. The latest edition was fresh. A painted scene of the community garden with children laughing, a food truck in the background, and a familiar silhouette of a mechanic handing a sandwich to a woman with 3 kids. He blinked, taken aback. At the bottom, scrawled in yellow paint, it read, "Kindness started it. Love built the rest." That night, Grace and Ethan sat on the back porch, barefoot and side by side, sharing peach pie straight from the tin. The kids had long gone to bed. Fireflies blinked like old secrets, and the sky was thick with stars. "I keep thinking about how it all began," she said, licking a bit of syrup from her thumb. "A food bag, a fake smile, a stranger's tired eyes," Ethan replied. "And look at us now." He glanced at her, that slow, quiet look that said more than words ever could. "You think this lasts?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "Yes. Even with more storms, more messes, especially with them," she said, "because now we know. We're not doing it alone." He leaned back in his chair, arm draped behind hers, heart steady. And in that stillness, where no grand declaration was needed, the story settled into its final shape. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A life weathered, a love earned, a town mended, and a new day just waiting to be lived. Together. Always together. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story touched your heart the most? If stories like this bring light to your day, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family of kind-hearted listeners from all around the world. Your support means everything. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other.